feel much better knowing that they just have to look in one direction. So, for those of you that may not know me, I'm Greg Whitcup, director of both Cranbrook Art Museum as well as the Center for Collections and Research here at Cranbrook, and it's a real pleasure to be able to welcome back to Cranbrook Shanna Merola. Shanna is an artist, photographer, and political activist who is committed to grassroots activism and the role that photography plays in creating social justice. She has worked as an organizer with the National Lawyers Guild, a historically progressive group of civil rights attorneys who traveled south with the Freedom Riders and defended prisoners during the Attica uprising, as well as the Guild's Civil Resistance Committee, which provides legal support to groups engaging in nonviolent civil disobedience. Their political engagement has ranged from the recent D15 fast food strikes across Michigan to supporting activists involved in the struggle over water rights, evictions, and emergency management in Detroit. Recent assignments have brought Shanna to hotspots around the nation, including Ferguson, Missouri, where she documented the heightened militarization of Mike Brown's neighborhood as the community rallied to protest the response of the police. Shanna was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and received her BFA in 2007 from VCU in Richmond, Virginia. In 2011, she graduated from Cranbrook Academy of Art with an MFA in photography. She lives and works in Detroit, Michigan, where, in addition to serving as the legal observer coordinator for the National Lawyers Guild Detroit chapter, she teaches at the College for Creative Studies. Please join me in welcoming back to Cranbrook, Shanna Merola.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Greg. And I just wanted to also say thank you so much to Liz Cohen, who always encouraged me to make work about what I thought was important, even when I did not know what my work was about. And so with that, I will start. So, my work is this okay? Is that too loud? My work is based on researching local history, working with current grassroots movements, and making connections between the two. The series I've included in this presentation focus on sites of struggle against repression in American history from the Detroit '67 rebellion to the current movement in Ferguson, Missouri. This practice began while I was an undergrad at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, former capital of the Confederacy. I knew little about Richmond before moving there. While researching the city's history, I learned that the city had been set on fire 3 times, and it was home to thousands of Confederate soldiers who died during the American Civil War. And it was also played a major role in the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, Richmond was second only to New Orleans in the history of human trafficking in Northern America. It was a major port in the Northern South where slave ships would dock here along the banks of the James River. Today, this place is a quiet park where you can find a few people fishing during the day and see the city's business district in the distance. Near the water is a trail through the woods where slaves would be led at night from the docks into a part of town called Shockoe Bottom, which is now a bustling section of downtown with restaurants, bars, and a partially defunct train station. But at one time, the area was a major slave trading hub, and over these sites stood auction houses, slave jails, and hotels for buyers traveling all over the Northern South. Slaves that died in jail before auction were buried in unmarked graves in the land beyond that bridge. The burial ground was also the site of the town gallows used for public execution and where Gabriel Prosser, leader of the famous slave revolt of 1800, was buried. I began photographing these sites at night with a pinhole camera, and I photographed them over the course of different seasons for 2 years. When I began in 2007, there were no signs or historical markers on the land, only parking lots which had fallen into disrepair. To most of Richmond, these places were of little significance, but the city maps indicated that this could be the oldest slave cemetery in the colonial United States. So while the process of creating this series was solitary, it did eventually lead me to a whole community of people who were already working to see these sites memorialized. I was literally going down to these sites all the time, just like looking at the city maps and wondering, why aren't there any signs here, feeling like I was crazy. So I finally found these people. I met the Richmond Defenders through an exhibit of my photographs at a local museum. And they had been in a battle for years with the city to acknowledge the lot as sacred ground, and with VCU, who used the site as a parking lot until coming under pressure with the Black Student Union. In 2011, burial ground advocates were arrested after successfully blockading the lot. And finally, that year, VCU was forced to close it down and transferred the land to the city of Richmond. I left Richmond in 2008 and had not seen the burial ground until this past summer when I returned to teach a photo class at VCU. Over the course of 6 years, many city council meetings, protests, and public ceremonies, the community won the rights to memorialize this site. Grass has been grown where the cars used to park, and makeshift memorials and temporary altars mark the land. These small but meaningful recognitions are indications of struggle and progress. And so I rephotographed all the sites again, only during the day, and I reconnected with grassroots activists who played a big part in politicizing me. Anna Edwards of the Sacred Ground Reclamation Project, and Phil Waledo, anti-war activist and editor of the Richmond Defender. Together, they continue to fight for the preservation of the burial ground as a historic site against the demands of land developers who have created a campaign to build a baseball stadium on top of it. Among those opposing plans to develop a baseball stadium are direct descendants of Solomon Northup. Northup wrote about his experience in a Shockoe Bottom jail in 12 Years a Slave before being transported to New Orleans. While working on the sites of the slave trade, I was also making work in response to a book of lynching photographs called Without Sanctuary. Of the thousands of lynchings on record, many were public events that were photographed and then turned into postcards. Using photography as a tool to maintain white supremacist control by documenting the images and sending them out as a warning. I made these memorials in different parts of Virginia where lynchings had been recorded. The history of Jim Crow is being closely examined today as the murders of Mike Brown, Vonderrit Myers, and other victims of police brutality are commonly referred to as modern-day lynchings. And then this was the last project I worked on before leaving the South and moving to the remote and rural town of Bangor, Maine, where 1 in every 8 people live below the poverty line, and unemployment and literacy rates are among the highest in the country. In Maine, I worked with a committee of union members called Food and Medicine, whose goals are connecting unions, farms, and businesses, and fighting for the rights of unemployed workers. This action was staged in 2009 with the national organization Jobs for Justice in response to whether Walmart workers would be given a decision in whether or not they wanted to unionize. The work I did with Food and Medicine often overlapped with food justice. At a Happy Town Farm, which is locally owned, works with unions, is certified organic, and unemployed workers can exchange work for shares of food. Working on the farm, I had conversations with people who educated me about the dangers of companies like Monsanto, corporations privatizing seeds, and governments criminalizing the collection of rainwater. It was through these conversations that I began to understand the concepts of cooperative economics and growing food as a revolutionary act. Because while we were small and did not have a lot of money, our efforts were in direct opposition to global systems of domination and oppression. And it helped to know that our practices connected us to a larger framework of organizations throughout the country, who also understood the benefits of socially conscious farming. These experiences prepared me for similar conversations in Detroit, where social justice and food sovereignty are intrinsically linked. It was a nice summer. And then I went to grad school, and I became really obsessed with the idea of post-9/11 anxiety and all the mediated traumas that have become a part of our national consciousness since 9/11, like oil spills, and Abu Ghraib, and Hurricane Katrina. I started making research walls with these images, and together they began to rhyme like a terrible poem. The process helped me create my next body of work titled Another Country, where images and headlines from daily newspapers became both subject and research. So this was taken in my backyard at the time in Pontiac, Michigan. This was behind an abandoned warehouse in Pontiac, on top of the Packard plant, on Belle Isle's riverfront. And then when graduate school was over, I discovered another kind of education outside of the academy walls. When my research of Detroit's political history led me to Grace Lee Boggs, the 99-year-old revolutionary activist who worked for decades in the city alongside her husband, James Boggs, and countless civil rights leaders, including Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. Through my introduction to the Boggs Center, I met the larger network of social justice groups that make up the Detroit City of Hope, and I began working with the Detroit Coalition Against Police Brutality. In addition to projects like this neighborhood boarding project in Brightmoor, the Coalition Against Police Brutality does things like restorative justice workshops, anti-police brutality marches, and sometimes we play with puppies when we have time. This is the Freedom Farm in Southeast. This is from the summer of 2012 at the annual Reimagining Work Conference, where people come from all over the country to share how they are practicing cooperative economics in their part of the country. This is from a rally for immigration reform in Southwest. This is a send-off for a 10-day peace walk from Detroit to Lansing. And this is Ron Scott, co-founder of the Detroit chapter of the Black Panther Party and the spokesperson for the Coalition Against Police Brutality. And he is on the steps of the Motown Museum here. And this is Ron again at a vigil for Renisha McBride last fall. So after many conversations, dinners, car rides, marches, and rallies, I decided on the focus for my next project. On July 23rd, 1967, a confrontation between Detroit Vice Squad officers and city residents exploded into a major rebellion, the largest in U.S. history at that time. President Lyndon Johnson sent in the National Guard and U.S. Army paratroopers, and over the course of 5 days, 43 people were killed. Television crews recorded video and showed live footage to the rest of the nation as the city burned. In the series Black Day in July, I examined this archival footage, and the present-day streets of 12th and Claremont, where the rebellion began. So these images were taken inside some of the vacant homes that are still standing on 12th and Claremont. While researching this project, I was thinking a lot about the criticisms of ruin porn and about how pornography can strip the subject of its image, of its humanness. And I was wondering if there was ever a way to photograph ruins without exploiting them. I tried to do this by making the history of these sites central to how we look at them. And this is my friends getting weird for me in Hamtramck. This tank was just there. I also conducted video interviews with residents who had experienced the rebellion firsthand. And I just started transcribing them, so eventually I would like the project to turn into a book. It was through these interviews that I discovered the National Lawyers Guild, which is the oldest and most extensive network of human rights activists working within the legal system. In the 1960s, the Guild set up offices in the South and organized thousands of volunteer lawyers to support the civil rights movement. In 1971, they fought to defend prisoners during the Attica prison uprising. Guild lawyers also represented thousands of demonstrators arrested in anti-war protests in the 70s and provided defense at the trials of FBI-targeted members of the Black Panther Party, the American Indian Movement, and the Puerto Rican Independence Movement. One program within the Guild is to provide legal observers at political rallies. The primary role of the legal observer is to be the eyes and ears of the legal team and to make sure that the civil rights of the demonstrators are not being violated by the police. This is from, so in the fall of 2013, I became the Legal Observer Coordinator for the Detroit and Michigan chapter of the Lawyers Guild. And this is from the first action that I legal observed, where protesters marched around the courthouse on the first day of the bankruptcy hearing, and they surrounded it in caution tape in a symbolic gesture. This is from a street blockade on May Day. They had closed down Jefferson. So sometimes the police will come to us and they'll ask us if we can make the protesters stop. But that's not our role. That's more of the role of the police liaison. They'll confuse us with police liaisons sometimes. But we don't ever make decisions for the protesters. We believe that the protesters should be leading the movement, not the lawyers. Groups like Eviction Defense hold actions to keep people in their homes. So sometimes when a family is being evicted, the last thing that the banks will do is bring dumpsters to their homes. And Eviction Defense and groups like that will go to the house and they'll surround the dumpster and they'll link arms around the dumpster until the people are forced to leave and the banks are forced into a conversation with the families. And they've actually been really successful. They also have progressive lawyers who bring litigation in court. D15, Good Jobs Now, and SEIU are union groups organizing to raise the minimum wage and fight for a union in the fast food industry. Fast food strikes will often be held in solidarity throughout the country on the same day. These are really fun. And we'll go from one at 6 a.m. to another one at 10 and then another one at 11. That was the manager of the McDonald's standing in the background. The protesters will often shut down the drive-thru and sing to the people inside. On August 25th in Oxford, Michigan, 2 activists with the group My Cats locked their necks with U-locks to a truck leaving the entrance of an Enbridge construction yard. This is just one in a series of actions the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands has enacted against the expansion of the pipelines across the state. So I don't know if anybody remembers the Kalamazoo oil spill a couple of years ago. It was one of the largest, it was the largest inland oil spill. And Enbridge was the company that was responsible for this spill, and they haven't cleaned the river, and they haven't paid the community anything in restitutions. And they are continuing to build pipelines. Another role that legal observers can provide after the action is to find out where the arrestees are being taken to do jail support. So this is the groups, this is the affinity group, and I went with them, and you learn things about bail and bond, and if you can contact the people's family, if you can get information on the inside about what they can eat if they have food allergies. Sometimes they'll listen to you. And I don't know if you can see, but a prisoner had held up an SOS sign in the window. The Detroit Light Brigade holds protest marches through the city at night. Using LED lights fixed to foam core panels, they transform dark streets and building facades into a call for action. A lot of the activists who work with the Detroit Light Brigade intersect with the Michigan Coalition Against Tar Sands. There are a lot of environmental justice activists. But recently with the water shutoffs, a lot of activists have been coming together from different groups, police brutality groups and water rights groups and eviction defense groups are coming together to work because it's such an intersectional issue. Earlier this year, Detroit Water and Sewage began an aggressive campaign to shut off water in Detroit to residents who owed as little as $150 on their water bill. As of October 22nd, about 30,000 water accounts had been shut off altogether. With no help from the city, community members have raised funds to set up stations with free and clean water throughout Detroit for residents who have had their water shut off. Some people are hesitant to seek out the water stations because they are ashamed, and others refuse to go to the Department of Public Services because you can have your children removed from your home if you have no running water. So we received information over the summer that some residents thought the stations were actually a trap set by DPS. So in addition to the stations, groups like We the People of Detroit and the People's Water Board have been canvassing in affected neighborhoods to try to reach people who are skeptical or scared to go into the stations and get clean water. And 99% of the shutoffs have been for residential accounts and not commercial. The United Nations has called the water shutoffs a human rights violation, and they were actually here recently. Meanwhile, activist groups have been rallying outside DWSD, writing letters, packing courtrooms, bringing litigation, and creating alternative solutions through mutual aid. Oops. This is the PR guy for DWSD. He hates us. This is in the Guardian building downtown. There's a Bank of America headquarters there, so sometimes they'll go inside and disrupt business. On July 10th, police arrested 10 protesters after they locked hands and blocked the entrance to Homrich Construction, the private company that's executing the water shutoffs. Among those arrested were nuns, pastors, seniors, community leaders, and an editor from the Michigan Citizen. This is Baxter Jones, who works with eviction defense, and he is blocking a Homrich truck from coming into the site. He was not arrested on this day, but there was a second blockade later on in the summer where a number of people were arrested, and he was arrested that time. On September 4th, police arrested dozens of fast food workers rallying for higher wages on the border of Detroit and Grosse Pointe. For the first time in the campaign, protesters committed civil disobedience by locking arms and blocking Mack Avenue, prompting more than 24 police from both cities to make about 40 arrests. I had been working with the National Lawyers Guild and going to protests and legal observing for almost a year with no arrests and barely any police interaction at all. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the summer, it was boom, boom, boom. Each one of these actions was happening after the next, and all of a sudden everybody was committing civil disobedience. On Saturday, August 9th, Officer Darren Wilson shot 18-year-old Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, a suburbs of St. Louis. The unarmed teenager was shot 6 times. His body was left uncovered for hours in the middle of a street in a residential neighborhood. The shooting ignited outrage and protests from the community in Ferguson that have continued until now. Today marks the 100th day since Mike Brown has been killed. So I think it was like the Wednesday before we left to go down. I was on Facebook at night, and I got on and I saw all of this. I saw these live streams of that night vision video, and I heard people were like tweeting and saying, the police are shooting rubber bullets into neighborhoods, and the police are telling the media to turn their cameras off. And so, it was just sort of this crazy thing that seemed really surreal. And I was thinking, I want to go down there. And so 2 days later, sure enough, there was a national call for mass defense for legal observers. So we went down. This is a memorial at the Canfield Greens, the housing complex where Brown was shot. There's a memorial on the site where his body was laying. Despite people constantly visiting the site, it has been vandalized and set on fire. Since the shooting, David Witt, a resident in the Canfield Greens, has started a cop watch program to arm residents with body cameras. The first time I went to Ferguson, so that was in response to the national call. And so this was a typical scene. Officers were everywhere the protesters were. They usually look like this during the day and would wear riot and tactical gear at night. There were police in plain clothes walking through crowds and following organizers back to their houses after rallies. These officers were on top of a roof of a fire station, and I was standing across the street on the steps of a church where a crowd of a few hundred people had gathered for prayers, drum circles, and nonviolent direct action training. The first night we arrived, the demonstrations were large with a couple thousand people and decentralized. This was at the Quick Trip gas station, which had been burned down, and it was being used by the protesters as a space to gather. While a few miles away on the other end of Florissant, police had closed down access to a Target parking lot, and they were using it as a command center for police vehicles and armored tanks. For the stretch of miles in between, protesters sang and marched from day into night. This was just a typical creepy scene that would be happening in the suburbs. Police sort of, blocking off streets, checking IDs, asking people where they were going. On the second night we were there, a curfew had been instated. Protesters held signs and took photographs in front of cops in riot gear. And the police were lining the sides of the streets in front of the strip malls. So the legal observers, we would go up to the police and ask them for their names, their IDs, and take photographs of their badges. But they were refusing us their names, and they were covering their badges, which is illegal. These are the protesters who decided to not go home after curfew. So later that night, police brought armored vehicles with LRADs and used chemical weapons for crowd control. And this is a photo of protesters running from tear gas. So legal observers, another thing we can do is we may collect evidence like canisters or bullet shells left behind in a Ziploc bag, and then which is then dated. This is one of the tear gas canisters. These are some of the chemical weapons that are being used in Ferguson: CS gas, tear gas, and pepper spray. Other crowd control and dispersal tactics. Smoke and flashbangs sound like pops from a gun, so it sounds really scary because it sounds like you're getting shot at. And then there are also, it's visually disorienting because there's a bright flash of light and then thick smoke, so you can't really see where you're going. They've also used rubber bullets, which are classified as non-lethal. Rubber bullets are meant to incapacitate, but they can deform, permanently disable, and sometimes kill. So this is an LRAD. This is a long-range acoustic device. It's a sonic weapon developed to send warnings and pain-inducing tones over incredibly long distances. LRADs are used mostly for protesters, pirates, and whales. The sonic rays can cause permanent damage. But the police have been using the LRAD because it doesn't create a visual of them. Like, they're not throwing tear gas at the crowd, they're not shooting rubber bullets, so they don't look like fascists. The media is not catching them looking horribly out of control. You can't, catch the sonic sound, but it's incredibly painful. So that was August. So then I went back again in October, which was a completely different experience. It was a national call for protests and civil disobedience. So following a second call for legal observers, I went back from the 10th to the 14th for the weekend of action. Groups called for by groups like the Organization for Black Struggle and Missourians Organizing for Reform and other frontline groups. People came from all over the country and poured in throughout the weekend, from fast food workers to environmental justice activists to cop watch groups. This is a group called Lost Voices that's been incredibly active down there in sustaining the movement. They've been out, if you ever watch the live stream of protesters in front of the Ferguson Police Department, they've been out there many nights. So this was sort of like the big national day, march. And then they marched from the town square in St. Louis to the police headquarters. And they would stop and hold space in intersections and shut down intersections. They shut down this intersection for 4 minutes to symbolically represent the 4 hours that Mike Brown was laying in the street. And the police would come around and sort of surround everyone. And then protesters stood vigil almost every night outside of the Ferguson Police Department. The next day on Sunday was a day called Hip Hop and Hope. We went to this club where Dead Prez was playing, and there was just such a packed line we couldn't get in. So this group, Lost Voices, just performed out on the street. They started performing out on the sidewalk, and then they just started marching throughout the streets. So the whole weekend was sort of like unplanned actions popping up And so we would just kind of like get a call. If the legal observers weren't already there, we would get a call and we would just go out to wherever the action was. Okay, so let's see if this video plays. Later on that day, this started as a solidarity action in Shaw, a neighboring suburb of Ferguson, where Vonderett Myers, another unarmed teen, was shot and killed just weeks after Mike Brown. Police were essentially shutting down the streets, and they had checkpoints where they were stopping and searching. They were stopping vehicles, IDing people, and sometimes searching. So we got a call that police were detaining a car from New York. So we went to Legal Observe. But when we got there, the police were leaving, and after a few minutes, hundreds of protesters were marching around the corner. So we marched with them to the St. Louis University campus, where the police finally let us through. And I didn't see this, but I guess there was a student at the gates, and some police came up to the gates, and the student showed them his ID and said, "I'm a student here, I invited some friends." And there were thousands and thousands of people. We got there, and just like people kept pouring in from every direction. So there were different groups of protests all leading to St. Louis campus, but we were kind of like unaware of each other, so we didn't realize how many people were actually going to be there. Oops. Sorry, I have another video. Thank you.
Stay together. Stay together. Keep it tight.
Hey, y'all, we need y'all to keep this line tight. Keep this line tight. Get behind the family right here. Get behind the family.
If they lock one of us up, they got to lock all of us up.
You hear that?
Who doesn't know the jail support number? 3140.
So this was the next day. That actually ended at 3 o'clock in the morning, so this was like a few hours later. This is a video from Moral Mondays, which was a day of civil disobedience.
Okay.
We know that you all are just one police department. But guess what? Healing starts somewhere. And today we're starting with Ferguson. And we will spread abroad. And we will not go away until things change. Until change happens.
Never again. Never again. Never again. Never again. I don't know how they're going to get coming forward.
Everyone on this side. this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom.
Oh, gotcha, we bring on.
With my mind
All right,
stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
So this was a really fascinating action to me because it was like mostly clergy, and Cornel West was there, and people were, they would link arms and they would just push closer and closer into the police line, and the police would push back against them. And so eventually they're forcing the police to arrest them. The jail support did overnight one night, they got 80 people out of jail. And so one of the things I was learning to do while I was down there was also to do jail support. Those zip ties are how they arrest people in mass demonstrations. They don't have enough handcuffs for everybody, so they'll put zip ties around their hands, around their wrists. This is the Detroit crew of legal observers that went down to Ferguson last time. And this is us with our shot in front of the police in riot gear. I was also meeting legal observers and guild members from all over the country, so it was like a really incredible experience, besides, the rest of the experience. So the actions continued on into the day, and the next one was at a fundraiser for a local politician who had publicly supported Darren Wilson and was up for re-election. Oh, maybe it's not going to play, sorry. I don't have too many videos from these because so many people were being arrested that footage is actually attorney-client privilege. But these are some images from those actions. This is from a Walmart. So there were actions being held at Walmart locations throughout St. Louis where people were committing civil disobedience in solidarity with an unarmed man who was shot and killed by a Walmart security person just like a couple of months ago. So they were just going from one Walmart to another, shutting them down throughout the night. And the police were getting increasingly hostile. This was also out in the suburbs. So the police were acting differently from the suburbs to the city. I didn't really know how to end the lecture because Ferguson's still happening. So I wanted to give people information and invite you all to a Know Your Rights training if you're interested. The Detroit and Michigan chapter of the NLG is currently offering Know Your Rights trainings. This was the invite for a workshop we created a few months ago to help protesters navigate the issues of public versus private space. We facilitate general Know Your Rights trainings for the streets workshops for stop and search. And we also provide workshops for those planning political actions. We can tailor the workshop to the concerns of the community requesting, the community that's requesting them. So for example, a Know Your Rights for undocumented citizens will be different than a Know Your Rights for environmental activists. If you would like to attend a Know Your Rights training workshop or become trained as a legal observer, please talk to me after the lecture. We'll be holding several events in different locations throughout the winter. The grand jury decision to indict Darren Wilson will be happening any day, possibly tomorrow. And so this is a photo I found online of shields that protesters have started making out of plywood because they've brought the National Guard in again. Oh, and here's my video. And that was my last video. Hang on one second. Hopefully this will play. That's it. Thank you.